Child abduction stories. They're the stuff of nightmares and the kind of thing that we wish wouldn't happen. But sadly they do, and there are many examples of them. Madeleine McCann, Ethan Patz. Stories that most people know. But what if I told you that one of the most dark, depressing and disturbing child kidnapping stories was a story that you probably don't even know about if you live outside the US? Hello everyone, I'm the Yorkshireman Reacts, also known as Luke, because, well, that's my real name. And today I'm going to tell you a story about child abduction, because it's a story that should be told and should never be forgotten, and in my opinion, not enough people know about it. So sit down, turn up the volume on your device, and prepare yourselves for one of the darkest stories of child kidnapping and abuse that the world has ever known. This is the story of Stephen Stayner. Stephen Stayner was born in Merced, California on the 18th of April 1965. Stephen was the third of 5 children born to Delbert and Kay Stayner. He had 3 sisters and an older brother, Carey. Stephen was what some may call a loner. He played ball in the park or outside his house by himself, and he was a shy, innocent and reserved boy. He rarely acted out or misbehaved, and had a healthy fear and respect for the authority of his parents, and the fact that he would be whipped by his father if he acted out. The 4th of December seemed just like any other day for most people. I Am Woman by Helen Reddy was number 1 in the charts in America, and the Chuck Berry classic My Ding-a-Ling was number 1 in the UK. And in 3 days, Apollo 17 would take what would go on to become the most famous picture of our planet, later becoming known as the Blue Marble. But for Stephen and his family, this seemingly normal, routine day was set to become the day that their lives would change forever. On the afternoon of the 4th of December 1972, 7-year-old Stephen was walking home from school on what seemed just like any other day. He was probably looking forward to what he would be having for dinner, or looking forward to playing ball outside his house or with his favourite toys. But it was on this particular day that someone out there had made plans that would change Stephen's life and his family's life forever. Kenneth Parnell, a Yosemite resort worker and convicted child molester, had decided recently that he wanted a son. But he knew that there was no way that that could happen given his criminal history. So he decided that the only way he would ever be able to have a son would be to steal a boy off the street and then keep him and raise him as his own. After a short time planning, he conspired with his friend, Irvin Edward Murphy, to head out and begin looking for young boys on the street. Acting on instructions from Parnell, Murphy passed out gospel tracts to boys walking home from school, and after spotting Stephen, claimed to be a church representative seeking donations. Murphy asked him if his mother would be willing to donate any items to the church. When Stephen replied that she would, Murphy asked Stayner where he lived, and if he would be willing to take Murphy to his home. Stephen agreed, but what he didn't know was that Kenneth Parnell was waiting nearby in a white Buick for this exact moment. Parnell noticed that Stephen had fallen for the ruse and pulled up alongside him and Irvin. Stephen willingly climbed into the car, thinking that this was just the way that they would be travelling to his house, and that everything was perfectly normal. But of course, it wasn't. Instead of driving to Stephen's house, Parnell drove to his nearby cabin in the Catheys Valley. Unbelievably, Parnell's cabin was located a mere several hundred feet away from his grandfather's residence, Stephen's grandfather's residence, that is. They arrived at the cabin and Parnell began manipulating Stephen by telling him his parents had asked Parnell to take him temporarily as they were having financial problems and they couldn't afford to look after him for now. Parnell's evil intentions and plans for innocent 7-year-old Stephen just weren't going to wait. And sadly, on the very first night in the cabin, Parnell molested Stephen. And then 13 days later, on the 17th of December 1972, Parnell fully raped Stephen for the first time. Stephen continuously told Parnell that he wanted to go home. Parnell had grown tired of scared Stephen's desperate pleas to go home and decided to put an end to it by blackmailing Stephen further, telling him his parents had granted full legal custody to him because they couldn't afford to keep him and they didn't want him anymore. Parnell's plan was working, and the life and safety of terrified 7-year-old Stephen was completely at Parnell's mercy. As time moved on, Parnell began calling Stephen Dennis Gregory Parnell, retaining Stephen's real middle name and date of birth. Stephen's true identity and previous life was beginning to be completely erased. Less than a month after the kidnap and over the next few years, Parnell began enrolling Stephen in various schools to keep up the facade. They also lived in various locations in California, including Santa Rosa and Comch. Parnell encouraged and allowed Stephen to begin drinking and smoking at a young age, and allowed him to misbehave and act as he pleaded, with the only real behaviour he disapproved of being Stephen ever telling anyone his true identity, or that he had been kidnapped or abused repeatedly by Parnell, believing that it would preserve his loyalty to him. Parnell moved from one menial job to the other, with some of his work requiring him to travel away and leaving Stayner unguarded, creating many opportunities for him to escape, but never did so. Stephen didn't know how to ask for assistance in such a situation. Then again, would any terrified 7-year-old boy know how to ask for help with this sort of thing? Literally, the only positive aspect of Stephen's life with Parnell was a Manchester Terrier gifted to him by Parnell called Queenie that used to belong to Parnell's mother. This was clearly his way of grooming Stephen, probably thinking that giving a 7-year-old his own puppy would make him forgive him for raping him on a regular basis. She would have been his only friend and the only real element of normality during this period of his life. As time moved on, Parnell would begin another relationship with a woman named Barbara Matthias. For a period of 18 months, she lived with Parnell and Stayner. But don't think that Matthias was Stephen's first real opportunity of escape and safety. Matthias, along with Parnell, raped Stephen on 9 separate occasions when he was just 9 years old. In 1975, on Parnell's instruction, Matthias tried to lure another young boy, who was in the Santa Rosa Boys Club with Stayner, into Parnell's car. The attempt was unsuccessful, thankfully. She would later claim that she was completely unaware that Stephen or Dennis, as she knew him, had been kidnapped. Yet, she had no issue whatsoever with raping him, a scared, innocent, defenceless 9-year-old boy. For 2 years, Stephen's life was just a constant revolving schedule of rape, fear, and being made to believe his parents didn't want him anymore. He had been reduced to nothing more than the sexual object and property of a disgusting, sick, twisted monster. As Stephen began puberty, Parnell could no longer receive the desired sexual gratification that he had become accustomed to over the years, and so decided that the time had come for him to find himself a second victim, with Parnell intending to use Stephen in the plan, probably thinking that a 6 or 7-year-old boy would be more likely to trust a 14-year-old boy rather than a 41-year-old man. Parnell had used Stephen in several kidnapping attempts, but thankfully they all failed. Parnell believed it was because Stephen lacked the skills required to be successful in such depraved endeavours. However, the true reason was much more noble. It was because Stephen had intentionally sabotaged every single attempt, saving each boy from suffering the same abuse and torture that he had suffered. In such a situation, Stephen had still retained enough mental sanity to still care about the safety of other children, potentially risking his own life if Parnell ever discovered the truth. Parnell was no stranger to violence either, as he had also been convicted of an armed robbery in the past. But Parnell, like all other child abusers, wasn't going to allow anything to stop him from getting what he wanted. And on the 14th of February 1980, Parnell and a teenage friend of Stayner's named Randall Sean Porman kidnapped 5-year-old Timmy White in Ukiah. Porman noticed 5-year-old Timmy White, who was playing outside his parents' house in Ukiah, California, and ushered him into Parnell's getaway car. When White refused and attempted to run indoors, Porman shoved the boy against a chain-link fence, forced him to loosen his grip, then dragged him, kicking and screaming, into the car. Parnell made quick work in brainwashing White, as he had done with Stayner's abduction, repeatedly trying to get White to think his new name was Tommy. Parnell paid off Porman with cash and marijuana, then ordered him to leave and never speak of the incident again. He also dyed Timmy's hair, that was blonde, dark brown, in order to mask his appearance from the forthcoming missing child posters. Ultimately, Parnell would pass White off as his younger son and Stayner's brother. White forged a bond with Stayner during the 16 days he was held captive, and spoke favourably of how the older boy took care of him. Stayner, determined to not see another child suffer the systematic sexual abuse that he had endured, sought to return White to his parents. March the 1st, 1980. Parnell was away at his night security job, and Stephen decided enough was enough. So Stephen left with White and hitchhiked into Ukiah. After they were unable to locate White's home, they went to a police station. They had made it. The relentless hell and continuous sexual torture and abuse was finally over for Stephen, and the intended identical fate for 5-year-old Timmy wasn't going to happen either. Stephen saved not one, but 2 boys that day. By the morning of March 2nd, 1980, Parnell had been arrested on suspicion of abducting both boys, and Stephen and Timmy were reunited with their families. The truth about Parnell would finally be discovered, and he would finally face punishment. But not in the way you'd hope. When the police checked into his background, they found a previous sodomy conviction against him, involving a 9-year-old boy in 1951. In 1981, Parnell was tried and convicted of kidnapping White and Stayner in 2 separate trials. He was sentenced to a measly 7 years, but was paroled after serving just 5. Disgustingly, Parnell was not charged with the numerous sexual assaults on Stayner and other boys, because most of them occurred outside the jurisdiction of the Merced County prosecutor, or were then outside the statute of limitations. The Mendocino County prosecutors, acting almost entirely alone, decided not to prosecute Parnell for the sexual assaults that occurred in their jurisdiction. The oh-so-wonderful American justice system completely and entirely failed Stephen. Murphy for helping kidnap Stayner and Porman for helping kidnap White were convicted of lesser charges. Both claimed they knew nothing of the sexual assaults on Stayner, and Barbara Matthias, who raped Stephen 9 times when he was 9 years old, was never even arrested. Stayner remembered the kindness that Murphy, or Uncle Murphy, as he knew him, had shown him in the first week of captivity, while they were both under the influence of Parnell's manipulation, and he believed that Murphy was as much Parnell's victim as he and Timmy were. Stayner's kidnapping and its aftermath prompted California lawmakers to change state laws to allow consecutive prison terms in similar cases. But, for me, the term "too little too late" springs to mind. After returning to his family, Stayner had trouble adjusting to a more structured household, as he had been allowed to smoke, drink and do as he pleased while he lived with Parnell. In an interview with Newsweek shortly after his escape, Stayner said, "I returned almost a grown man, and yet my parents saw me at first as their 7-year-old. I'll post a clip of the interview if I can find it, either here or at some other point in the video, but just in case I can't find a clip, I'll continue what he said in the interview. After they stopped trying to teach me the fundamentals all over again, it got better, but why doesn't my dad hug me anymore? Everything has changed. Sometimes I blame myself. I don't know sometimes if I should have come home. Would I have been better off if I didn't?" Stephen underwent brief counselling, but never sought additional treatment. He also refused to disclose all the details of the abuse he suffered from Parnell. In a 2007 interview, Stayner's sister said that her brother did not seek counselling because their father said Stayner didn't need any. She added, "He got on with his life, but he was pretty messed up. He was bullied by other children at school for being molested and eventually dropped out. Stayner began to drink frequently and was eventually kicked out of the family home. His relationship with his father remained strained." As time moved on, Stephen continued to attempt to live a normal life and move on. In 1985, Stayner married 17-year-old Jodie Edmondson, with whom he had 2 children, a daughter named Ashley and a son named Stephen Jr. He also worked with child abduction groups, spoke to children about personal safety and gave interviews about his kidnapping. Despite everything he'd been through, he used his torturous ordeal and harrowing experiences to try and prevent the same things from happening to other children. It seemed that he was going to be able to live his life as normal. Well, as normal as could be expected for someone carrying such a deep and painful trauma. But, sadly, there wouldn't be a happy ending for Stephen. On the 16th of September 1989, Stephen was riding home from work on his motorbike. He collided with a car in a hit-and-run accident, and he sustained severe head injuries and trauma and died an hour later. 500 people attended his funeral, and Timmy White, who was then 14, was a pallbearer. The aftermath of the situation ripped a hole through the family's hearts, and in 1999, Stephen's brother, Carey, confessed to and was convicted of killing 4 women. 10 years after Stayner's death, the city of Merced asked its residents to propose names for city parks, honouring Merced's notable citizens. Stayner's parents proposed that one be named Stayner Park, but this idea was eventually rejected, and the honour was instead given to another Merced resident, because Merced city officials feared that the name Stayner Park would be associated with Carey rather than Stephen. In 2004, Parnell, then 72 years old, was convicted of trying the previous year to persuade his caretaker's sister to procure for him a young boy for $500. Aware of Parnell's past, she reported this to the local police. Timmy White, then a grown man, was subpoenaed to testify in Parnell's trial. Although Stayner was dead, his testimony at Parnell's earlier trial was read to jurors as evidence in Parnell's 2004 trial. Parnell died of natural causes on the 21st of January 2008 at the California Medical Center in Vacaville, California, while serving a sentence of 25 years to life. Timmy White later became a Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy. He died on the 1st of April 2010, aged just 35, from a pulmonary embolism. Nearly 5 months later, on the 21st of August 2010, a statue of Stayner and White was dedicated in Applegate Park in Merced. Residents of Ukiah, White's hometown, carved a statue showing a teenage Stayner with young White in hand while escaping their captivity. This story is easily one of the most devastating and unfortunate stories of child abuse in American history, yet barely anyone outside of the country is even aware of it. I wanted to tell this story because, well, Stephen deserves it. He deserves it to be told, and he deserves to be remembered, because he put another child's safety before his own. In fact, many other children's safety before his own, despite the situation that he was in. I mean, for all he knew, if Parnell had found out that he'd sabotaged numerous kidnapping attempts, he could have killed him. I mean, he kidnapped him when he was 7 and kept him until he was 14, and he was in constant fear. He was completely at Parnell's mercy. As far as I'm concerned, Stephen was and is an American hero and should always be remembered as such. So please, if you're religious, then say a prayer for Stephen and Timmy too. Remember him. Say his name. Tell people about this story. Share this video with as many people as you can so that they know about them too. Please, don't let Stephen be forgotten. Just remember his name. Stephen Gregory Stayner. I'd like to thank everybody for watching this video. I apologise if this has upset you, but as far as I'm concerned, some of the most important stories to be told aren't easy to hear. But I felt it was my duty to tell this story. There's also a TV film based on Stephen's story called I Know My First Name is Stephen. I recommend that you all go watch it. It's really good, and it does a good job of telling the story in an easier way to consume than, well, reading it in writing. It can be difficult to see things in that way. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate your time. Remember, tell this story to other people. Remember his name. Don't let his story be forgotten. Rest in peace, Stephen Stayner. Rest in peace, Timmy White. Thank you.